Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be reading The African Personality in America by Kobe Cambone, starting on page 16. Research support for worldview differences between Africans and Europeans.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
I want to say greetings to Anthony McPhail. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully, you're enjoying this reading. Research support confirming the existence of these fundamental worldview differences between Africans and Europeans are overwhelming when one includes the vast array of sources which provide definitive data to this effect. For example, historical cultural data are indeed overwhelmingly definitive from the earliest knowledge that we have of Africans and later of Europeans, right up to contemporary times. The striking consistency and continuity in fundamental cultural values, social philosophy, and social behavior, which have distinguished these two groups throughout history and in dispersed locations around the planet, makes a conclusive case for the validity of these worldview differences between Africans and Europeans. Even recent self reported questionnaire type data provides support for this overwhelming pool of evidence. This is the case notwithstanding their limitations due to tendencies towards falsification of responses based on social demands and or approval, which is the desire to camouflage in public presentation one's personal values and beliefs where they may reflect what is perceived and as unpopular or negative views, and perhaps other demand features of such data collection instruments and procedures. So basically, people might lie to you. Studies by Curry back in 1984 and my work with my associates in particular, as well as that of others, lend support to the continuity within these worldview differences and their contemporary viability. So it's still true. Illustratively, Reggie Hopkins, a former student, and I sought to develop a worldview scale to assess these differences through the direct procedure of Africans and Europeans' self reports. The scale was developed empirically by administering a large pool of some 60 self-description type value belief system items to a small sample of Africans and Europeans, college students in the southern region in the United States. These students ranged in age from 17 to 30 years old. The items were slanted toward either the African worldview or the European worldview and were presented in either a Likert, which is an agreement disagreement format, or in a forced choice format. The latter pitting an African worldview choice against a European worldview choice. All of the items had been pre-rated on their worldview content by a number of scholars having substantive knowledge about worldview differences. We analyzed how the students diverged racially in their responses to the preliminary items and selected from the larger pool of items those 26 items, close to half of the total preliminary item pool, which best discriminated between the two groups. The criterion for item discrimination was a 70% divergence between the two racial groupings of subjects. The resulting worldview scale of 26 items, both Likert and forced choice formatted, was then administered to a larger sample of African and European students. This sample ranged in age from 17 to 52 years old, and the vast majority of them being between 17 and 29 years old. Findings revealed, as expected, that African males and females scored significantly more African centered, while European males and females scored significantly more Eurocentric on the worldviews scale. Additionally, we found that the African males and females scored more similarly in terms of degree of Afrocentrism than did the European males and females in terms of degree of Eurocentrism. That means that the women and African black men and women are more closer to being African centered than European men and women are to being Eurocentric in their worldview overall, and the African men and women are closer to one another in their African centered worldview than European men and women are in their European centered worldview. There was no significant difference between the African males and females' Afrocentric scores. However, the European males and females were significantly different in their Eurocentric worldview scores, with the European males scoring more Eurocentric than the European females. This finding was interpreted as perhaps a product of the European patriarchal male dominance system of socialization, whereby the emphasis is placed more on the male as the key cultural carrier and enforcer than the female. Of course, European females may be more subject to the more powerful social approval demands than European males. Whatever the case may be, in the latter findings, the overall results are almost consistent with the prediction of the worldview's paradigm and therefore can be interpreted as supportive. At the same time, it is acknowledged that broader based administering of this instrument should clarify the overall significance of these findings. The most powerful, discriminating, contrasting conceptual dimensions of the worldview's paradigm as reflected in the worldview scale system items were A. Harmony with nature versus control over nature. B. Spiritualism versus materialism. C. Collectivism versus individualism. D. Strong versus weak religious orientation. And E. Interdependence versus separateness. This study therefore suggests that worldview differences are indeed fundamental in beliefs and perceptions of Africans and Europeans, despite centuries of forced cultural assimilation of the Africans into the European system. In fact, these worldview differences appear so strong that even the powerful social approval compliance demand of the Eurocentric American social reality, in other words, the tendency among Europeans in particular to falsify their public responses toward an ideal standard of social acceptability, cannot distort or disguise them to the degree that they cannot be ferreted out through this kind of systematic empirical assessment. The data from this study were analyzed as preliminary findings supportive of worldview differences between Africans and Europeans living in America. Greetings, Sister Raw. Thanks so much for tuning in, you and the elders that are with you. Conclusion. In concluding, this chapter has attempted to articulate the absolute necessity for the employment of the worldview's paradigm in our approach to conceptualizing and understanding so called human psychological functioning and behavior. This fact cannot continue to be overlooked, denied, or ignored through African scholars' intellectual, philosophical, or ideological submission to and or incarceration by the European supremacy domination world order. Hence, it is impossible to accurately comprehend either African experience outside of the context of the worldview's paradigm. As this book seeks to articulate some important aspects of the African psychological experience, particularly in North America, but true of all Africans throughout the world that have access to white people, it should be clear then that the worldview paradigm lies at the very heart of the analysis and must not be separated from it. In reality, the fact is that it actually cannot be. There is very little question that this has been the primary problem or deficit in most analysis attempting to understand and explain the cross-cultural or cultural relative phenomena between Africans and Europeans. The Eurocentric white supremacy domination orientation or thrust of so-called human sciences has dictated this approach. Many African scientists have and continue to participate in this Eurocentric domination over our understanding of the African and European realities. So they're stuck in ivory towers. We African scientists must finally come to the realization that our victimization and complicitness in the distortion and misrepresentation of true cultural relativism. Hence, we must cease our miseducated and conceptually incarcerated practice of subjecting African experience to European worldview analysis, believing that we are generating an accurate and meaningful picture of the African condition of the world. Hopefully, the corrective activity of the African worldview centered movement will continue to grow and expand, engulfing the totality of the African community, particularly our scholars, because they're in ivory towers. Indeed, if we are to correct the falsehoods, distortions, and misrepresentations of both African and European experiences that have characterized the bulk of so-called world scholarship, in other words, white supremacy dominated world scholarship, the ensuing chapters of this book will attempt to present an African worldview centered analysis of the African experience. While much of this analysis will apply to the African experience anywhere on the planet, it is particularly applicable to the African experience as it has occurred in the diaspora of the United States, sometimes referred to as New Europe. Chapter 2 starts with a quote by Wayne Nobles. Power is the ability to define reality and to make others accept your definitions as their own. Wade W. Nobles. Afrocentric Afrocentric versus non-Afrocentric approaches to the study of African personality. Ancient African foundations of African Black psychology. It is now an accepted fact that the foundation for the study of the mind, the soul, the metaphysical, spiritual reality, and human development, transformation, functioning, and interaction have their roots in the ancient Nile Valley, the Cushitic Nubian civilizations of Africa, if not earlier, and certainly reached their apex during that great period. This region, called Kemet in the ancient indigenous language of Medu Neter, gave the world its first great manifestation of human civilization. The Kemetic scholars and their predecessors established the earliest principles of the nature and functioning of the mind, soul, spirit, energy, and its manifestations in behavior. Psychology, in its earliest highly developed form, Kemetic psychology, at least for the sake of this analysis and this discussion. The African cosmological core, as was evident throughout the basic spiritualistic philosophy of an ancient Kemetic civilization, centered on the overriding principle of Ma'at, which is dynamic cosmic balance or human nature unity. The principle of Ma'at refers to the eternal cosmic order, balance, complementary, reciprocity, and by extension, truth, right, justice, and correct ethics. It represents the harmonious balance, adaptation, and complementary of all the elements of creation to form a connected, interconnected whole. The ancient Africans took the view that all life sustains life, and therefore all life was sacred. Ma'at is about the sacredness of life, about harmony within and between everything that exists. It means that acting in cooperation and in harmony with nature contributes to the maintenance of universal order. Hence, Ma'at is the foundation of all thought and functioning in Kemet. In other words, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, neurology, and medicine, engineering and architecture, as well as social behavior, human relations, personal functioning, and character development. The validity of all things had to be tested by Ma'at. Kemetic psychology or human sciences, and all of Kemetic spiritual science was the celebration of the African self, its continual cyclical process of transformation. It being all encompassing was based on we are formed, we are informed, the overriding spiritual principle of Ma'at. Again, everything was Ma'at. African Black psychology basic definition. As noted elsewhere, African Black psychology is best defined as a system of knowledge, philosophy, definitions, concepts, models, procedures, and practices concerning the nature of the social universe from the perspective of the African worldview. African psychology, therefore, derives naturally from the conceptual framework of the African worldview or cosmological system. Of course, European psychology may be similarly defined relative to the European worldview. The significant differences here, growing out of their previously discussed fundamental worldview distinctions, is African psychology's historical priority and its congruence with the natural order. African psychology or sacred spiritual science, like African culture, therefore, represents the philosophical and conceptual foundation for what we call psychology or mind sciences in the world. This observation, of course, recognizes the fact that Eurasians took, borrowed, and stole the African systems of knowledge and translated them, as best they could, into their own peculiar cultural framework. In other words, the Eurasian survival thrust. Where the study of the African personality in America from the perspective of African psychology is concerned, the implications of the definition of African psychology utilized in this book seem very clear. In this regard, two important assumptions become readily evident. One, there are fundamental differences between the natures of African psychological character or our cognitive, emotional, and behavioral style and non Africans. In other words, European psychological character. And two, accurate conceptualization, understanding, and assessment of the African psychological character can only be derived from the conceptual framework of the African worldview. Before discussing the African personality within the conceptual framework of the African worldview, we need to establish one additional point of clarity concerning issues in the study of African personality. This calls our attention to a brief analysis of some fundamental problems and obvious limitations that European psychology analysis of the African personality have contributed to our misunderstanding and misguided approaches to this issue. European psychology and the African personality. Volumes on top of volumes of so called universal psychological knowledge have been generated by the descendants of Europe clearly demonstrate that Western European psychology is about the affirmation of white European people's culture, philosophy, and physical survival. In short, the massive literature that they have generated has been designed to confirm the preeminence and supremacy of European culture over all other peoples of the world. A mere perusal of the so called psychology textbooks in any area of the discipline gives clear testimony to the institutionalized white supremacy content in such knowledge in terms of its values, concepts, definitions, words, and pictorials, as well as the implicit and subliminal yet omnipresent Eurocentric cultural icons and symbolism contained therein. Obviously, if so called Western psychology was really universal in nature, then one must raise the perplexing question of how does a minority or non-normative race of people in the world come to compromise it come to comprise its representative content. So how are we able to make up in this world a representative content for ourselves if everything is defined by white people? Anthony McPhail says he loves the analogy of the virus invading the immune system of a healthy body and causing sickness, the Urugu, and the sickness is taking on their ways. Exactly. This, of course, would be impossible for a truly universal psychology or knowledge base. The truth of the matter is that white European people, Eurocentric history, ideas, and social philosophy, European personality and social organization, their beliefs, values, customs, and behavioral dynamics and patterns have always defined the substance of Western psychology. From the early Greek plagiarizers, such as Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle, to name a few, to the more contemporary giants of European psychology like Freud, Skinner, and Rogers, among others, Eurocentric thought, ideas, and principles have falsely projected as representative and universal, have been falsely projected as representative and universal. So they are neither representative of the world nor are they universal, but they project that onto the world as if they are the standard. They even arrogantly use the albino rat, another peculiar minority of its species, as the normative object in the study of Guthrie, 1976. So they use white rats, which is a minority among the rat population, to study rats. Thus, what is traditionally called psychology in Western and European cultures, as well as in some contemporary African societies, albeit modified by indigenous thought in most of the latter cases, it is a science of human reality which literally celebrates and affirms white European peoplehood and world supremacy. It is now becoming well known that more than 5,000 years or more before the early Greek and Roman civilizations, Europe had not developed any sophisticated system of thought, language, or social organization. Africans, on the other hand, had developed all of these and many other indicators of high civilization, unparalleled and optimal levels of expression. Even the Greek concept for the psyche itself was derived from the ancient Kemetic or African concept of Saku. According to Akbar, Saku comes from the Medu language, which was called hieroglyphics by the Greeks. It means understanding, the illuminator, the eye, and the soul of being, that which inspires. Saku therefore refers to that spiritual core of the human being which represents one's highest human capacity or level of transformation. Thus, psychology originally referred to the study of the meaning of the soul and the spiritual transformation of the human being, which defines the unending cycle of life. So, psychology used to be a beautiful thing in our culture. It was about knowing yourself at the deepest level. Notwithstanding this, Europeans took this concept, misinterpreted it, mistranslated its meaning, as they have consistently done over and over again with indigenous African concepts, and redefined it in terms of their Eurocentric axiological principles of individualism, materialism, objectification, duality, linearity, and ordinary ranking aggression, conflict, opposition, and separation alienation. See some of the so called classic works of Freud, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Burris F. Skinner, and Carl Rogers in particular, as well as some of their icons for examples of these principles at work. From this context, they have rendered their classic definition of European Western psychology as the science of human behavior and mental processes. Because European psychology represents a Eurocentric framework for conceptualizing psychological phenomena, it has always been assumed in traditional Eurocentric approaches that European or European American people represent the only legitimate or optimal models of human behavior, biophysiological functioning, etc. Naturally, it has also been assumed as well that European culture, the European worldview, represent the only frame of reference for scientific inquiry into the nature of human personality. So they made themselves the standard. It is now becoming widely recognized among Black equals African psychologists that where European American psychology has attempted to assess radical differences in psychological functioning, the African side of the picture has been consistently misrepresented and distorted within the conceptual framework of the European worldview. Hence, the Eurocentric axiological principles of individualism, materialism, duality, opposition and conflict, separateness and alienation, linearity and ordinal ranking, and intervention through aggression, suppression, and unnatural alteration are summarily imposed on the African personality to reduce it to a defective, deficient European form. So they force their ideas and their way of being on us to make us deficient and defective because they can't handle the power that we have. Greetings, Forecast. Thanks for tuning in. Thus, a fundamental clash of cultural perspectives occurs when the African and European worldviews between the African and European worldviews when they converge around the psychological study of the African personality. With the reascension of African psychology in contemporary times, such a clash of cultures is played out in the inevitable confrontation war between African psychology, the African worldview, and European psychology, the European worldview. This is the natural consequence of African psychology's thrust to decolonize and liberate the African mind and to forge new cultural centered knowledge of the African psychological reality. So our realities are different. The non Afrocentric Eurocentric approach to African personality. A cursory examination of conceptions of personality in Western psychology invariably leads one to conclude that many obscure and clearly Eurocentric notions about personality, when applied to people of African descent, predominate the field. For example, when one views human personality from the framework of European American psychology, you are likely to conceive of it as constituting an insulary, individualized condition. That is, the psychological or biophysical or biopsychological condition uniquely tailored to each individual and defines his or her significance. Things such as personal, social, and functional significance among a world community of other individuals. Each individual is therefore regarded as having his or her own unique and personalized biopsychological condition and or character which characterizes only himself or herself and makes them a distinguishable significant entity. The so-called origin of the term personality within the European philosophical context, in fact, denotes its personal individualized meaning. In theory, this general Eurocentric model has claimed great success and enjoys widespread popularity. It even maintains some proponents within the ranks of contemporary African psychological thinkers in America. The Afrocentric model, on the other hand, is only recently coming and actually ascending into its own as a viable force to be reckoned with in the ongoing contemporary battle for African control over knowledge representing the African reality. As a result of Eurocentric cultural control over the American social reality and the so called scientific enterprise within it, including the discipline of psychology, the conception of African personality has suffered much from Eurocentric distortion. In fact, this tradition of distortion, misconception, and misinterpretation is one of the oldest in European American psychiatry. Virtually all of the negative and grossly inaccurate information regarding the African personality has been generated from this tradition, scientific racism. The traditional American psychology perspective interprets African behavior in terms of its deviation from a Eurocentric standard or norm. So they compare and contrast us to them. Thus, the traditional Eurocentric psychological approach to African personality is essentially centered around European American cultural standards and norms, which are essentially white supremacy based. Most of our present base of knowledge in this area then derives from the both implicit and explicit Eurocentric conceptual framework of the traditional American psychology constructs and research used to generate such knowledge. The traditional European psychological paradigm makes unilateral assumptions about the nature of so called African Americans and European American experiences that we in African psychology believe are fundamentally in error and violates all principles of cultural relativism in light of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. So, because of where we come from and because of how we live, we have different experiences and our psychological natures are different. If you come from a neighborhood where everybody is your extended family versus a neighborhood where you have neighbors that you don't talk to, you come from and experience very different realities. For example, the whole tradition of racial comparative research in Eurocentric psychology's study of the African personality clearly demonstrates the numerous flaws and failures inherent in this approach. The comparative approach to African personality assessment assumes a cultural, monistic conceptual base being predicated upon the so called melting pot thesis. So they were pushing the melting pot theory, which is we all come to America. And in America, we're all the same and we're all treated the same and we all have the same opportunities, but we don't. And that is just the reality of it. We're treated differently and we have different significant differences in the realities that we face each and every day. Black people in America have some of the lowest social capital in America, which means they don't have the opportunity to get a leg up because they know somebody on the inside. This thesis, the melting pot thesis, proposes that Africans and American and European Americans are actually a homogeneous group. It views only the African experiential history of enslavement and the continuing experience of racial discrimination as perhaps mitigating differentiating factors, along with the implicit assumption of inferior genetic condition. Therefore, it assumes equivalence of meanings and behaviors across obviously distinct cultural realities. Naturally, such comparative research has never generated racially culturally equivalent norms on which to base this so called comparative inferences. These models of the African personality are essentially oppression oriented and victim analysis. They view the African personality not only primarily reactive in nature, but also as motivated in terms of a purely negatively based psychological energy. It should not be surprising then that the observations and explanations of African personality that have derived from the comparative Eurocentric tradition are invariably presented as deficits and pathologies. So they label our habits and our way of being as negative. Everything we do is got some type of negative connotation. Thus, traditional European American white supremacy psychological analysis of the African personality at best present a clearly erroneous picture of African personality as being essentially the net result of the complex forces of racial oppression and inferior genes, rather than the indigenous cultural affirmative African cultural based forces perhaps interacting with those of racial oppression. So they blame it on us instead of themselves. For these and other reasons, the bulk of our existing knowledge and concerning the African personality in North America being dictated by traditional Eurocentric psychology is, according to many authorities, laden with gross misrepresentations of fact, which has resulted in great controversy and dispute. The Afrocentric versus non Afrocentric approach. In contrast to the non Afrocentric approach, the Afrocentric approach provides the only legitimate African cultural based conception of this phenomenon. Hence, two distinct approaches to understand African personality can be identified. They may be referred to as the Afrocentric versus the non Afrocentric approaches. The fundamental difference between the two being that the Afrocentric approach derives from the African worldview, and the non Afrocentric approach derives from the European worldview. The Afrocentric conceptual framework thus interprets African psychological functioning and behavior from the perspective of the African worldview. In other words, the African centered value system, the Mayat, articulated in Chapter 1, Philosophy, Norms, Rituals, Practices, and Social Organization, and so on. This approach then draws its conceptual framework from the distinct history, culture, and philosophy of African people, which prioritizes the affirmation of African life, its cultural integrity, and authenticity. This, of course, contrasts with the traditional or European American psychological perspective, which, as already stated, interprets African behavior in terms of its deviation from the Eurocentric standard or norm. Central to the Afrocentric paradigm is the fact that concepts of normal, natural African personality functioning derive from the norms and standards of the African experience as an authentic cultural system. The Afrocentric approach to African personality, then, unlike the traditional non Afrocentric approach, is guided by a positive energy assumption where the motivational thrust of the African personality is concerned. Hence, The motivational energy of the African personality, according to this approach, is culturally affirmative or self affirming and is therefore proactive in nature, as opposed to being strictly oppression centered and driven and thus reactive. Theory and research derived from this conceptual framework should therefore generate a more valid and reliable portrayal of the African personality in North America than that characterizing the traditional Eurocentric approach. There's a chart here that says the contrasting approaches to African personality theory. The Afrocentric theories are that the African worldview, positive energy assumption, a proactive thrust, normality emphasis, and the goal is Afrocentric orientation. The non Afrocentric theories are the European worldview, negative energy assumption, a reactive thrust, abnormality emphasis. So they're xenophobic. The types are pure Eurocentric and pseudo diffuse Afrocentric. The goals of this non African centric theory is Eurocentric orientation, transracial universal orientation, and pseudo Afrocentric orientation. And I will add to that list anti Blackness because they are afraid of disappearing into the darkness. The major characteristics distinguishing these two approaches of conceptualizing the African personality in America are summarized in the table I just described. As can be seen in this table, the distinguishing characteristics of the non Afrocentric theories of African personality are their reliance on the conceptual framework of the European worldview, their negative energy and reactive motivational emphasis, and their abnormality deficiency emphasis as the core of the African personality. Contrastingly, the distinguishing characteristics of the Afrocentric theories of African personality are their reliance on the African worldview as the conceptual framework for understanding the Black or African personality, their positive affirmative energy and proactive motivational emphasis, and their emphasis on normalcy, naturalness, or African centeredness as the core of African personality functioning. The two variants of the non Afrocentric theories are distinguished primarily in terms of whether the theorist is of European or Caucasian descent or of African descent. Where the theorist is European or white, such models are classified as pure Eurocentric models, and models generated by African theorists are classified as diffuse or pseudo Afrocentric models. Similarly, the personality or functional outcome expectations of these subtypes follow their different differential patterns either in a Eurocentric or a diffuse integrationist or universal psychological orientation is the expected outcome, which are essentially the very same conditions of cultural misorientation as we discussed in the previous book. The chat says Dr. Atnor Furman, a Haitian anthropologist, wrote The Equality of Races in 1885 as a rebuttal to the French racist Arthur Gabinow's work, The Inequality of Races. So we've been fighting scientific racism for over 100 years. This concept, cultural misorientation, will be explained in this book in chapter 6. But we read the book Cultural Misorientation, and you can check out the playlist for it. The Afrocentric theories, in contrast, predict the cultural affirmative outcome of the Afrocentric psychological orientation or African personality functioning, that the Afrocentric consciousness or African affirmation and self determination. Thus, it can be clearly seen that both approaches fulfill their respective undergirding cultural survival thrust. To elaborate upon this schematic, it should be emphasized that non Afrocentric theories begin with a negative energy assumption because they concentrate on describing and explaining the negative psychological impact of racism and or racial oppression on African functioning. They emphasize the centrality of striving to overcome racial oppression, thrusting oneself against these overpowering barriers, mostly through ineffective coping and faulty or inferior adaptations. Hence, the core energy in the African personality system occurs in response to external forces. The source of energy driving the African personality, therefore, resides outside of the self. The non Afrocentric theories conceptualize the African self as determined rather than determining, and thus as essentially reactive in nature. Consequently, these conceptualizations emphasize abnormality, weakness, vulnerability, and defensiveness, which are all negatively balanced conditions, as the basic striving or central features of the African personality. The Afrocentric theories, on the other hand, as previously noted, utilize the African worldview as their conceptual framework. These theories concentrate on describing and explaining the natural and normal condition of African psychological functioning and behavior, independent of white European supremacy, domination, or racism and racial oppression. They begin with a positive energy assumption, viewing the basic striving in the African personality as being directed toward self affirmation, self determination, and self fulfillment. The basic energy in the African personality, therefore, occurs in response to the natural requirements of one's own being, one's essence, meaning, and or purpose. In other words, one's Africanity. The basis of energy or force within the African personality from this perspective originates from one's own center of being, in other words, from within, from the nature of one's being, and is thus proactive, affirmative in nature. Recall that where the non Afrocentric theories of African personality are concerned, two forms of these theories were identified. They are pure Eurocentric models and diffuse or pseudo Afrocentric models. In addition to the fact that European theorists tend to be identified with the pure Eurocentric models and African theorists with the diffuse or pseudo Afrocentric models. Another major difference between them is that the latter attempts to superimpose what appears to be African centered terminology and concepts onto an otherwise Eurocentric model, while the former does not contain any such worldview contradictions. The reader is also referred back to Table 3 in reminder of the fact that the Afrocentric and non Afrocentric approaches differ in terms of the goal of African personality functioning or what constitutes optimal functioning. For the Afrocentric theories, naturally the development of an Afrocentric orientation represents optimal African personality functioning. The non Afrocentric theories, on the other hand, propose, in various disguised forms of terminology, either the development of Eurocentric orientation or a non racial, cultural, or non Afrocentric universal, transracial, or pseudo Afrocentric or bicultural iteration as being orientation as representing optimal African personality functioning. Remember when I told you integration was death? Assimilation is death. They are forms of slow death. From Table 3, then, we can readily see the blatant inappropriateness of Afrocentric theory and the clear appropriateness and absolute necessity for Afrocentric theory of an African personality in our attempt to generate an accurate and functionally relevant explanation and understanding of this phenomena. Thus, where Eurocentric conceptual standards have formed the basis for scientific explanations of racial cultural differences in behavior, as have always been the case in European Western psychology, European Americans have, naturally, been positioned as the reference point for adaptiveness, normality, and Africans have been positioned within the realm of abnormality, maladaptiveness, and deviance. It has been virtually impossible for so called Western or Eurocentric white supremacy psychology to conceptualize behavioral differences between Europeans and Africans living in North America, as, for example, qualitatively different behaviors which derive from fundamentally different worldview and cultural frameworks. African psychologists, social cultural scientists must therefore categorically reject the non Afrocentric approach to the study of the African personality and realign themselves in total with the Afrocentric approach if their work in this area is to be judged to have any value whatsoever for the African world. So they need to throw out those Eurocentric perspectives and paradigms that they've been judging us with because our paradigm, our worldview is Afrocentric. Our axiology is very different. We do not value the object as the highest form of attainment. We value the relationship with one another as the highest form of attainment and connectedness. Some basic assumptions of the Afrocentric approach on the nature of African personality. Given this overall perspective, we are now in a position to propose several important general assumptions about the nature of African personality, which derive from the framework of the Afrocentric approach. Specifically, the Afrocentric approach to personality makes four critical assumptions. First, the Afrocentric personality assumes that personality is primarily a biogenetically or innately determined phenomenon, which in many respects defies social environmental forces. At the same time, biogenetic forces in many other respects interact with social environmental forces in such intricate ways that it becomes utterly meaningless to attempt to separate or isolate their relative contributions. But where such intricate interactions occur, however, biogenetic forces are always assumed to represent the dominant force involved in determining the basic nature and direction of human personality. Thus, the basic nature and direction of human personality is always consistent, and only the conscious, expressive mediums, in other words, surface behaviors, are open to modification or alteration, or of a more or less surface nature, by the significant other and extended significant other social environment. So you are who you are. Whew. Secondly, the Afrocentric approach assumes that personality is primarily an internal, deeply rooted, intrapsychic phenomenon which is composed of an external surface medium of surface expressions as well and cannot be meaningfully separated from the totality of its components or various dimensions. In other words, personality cannot be meaningfully analyzed in parts, separate and isolated from the context of the whole. Thirdly, the Afrocentric approach assumes that personality is essentially a social collective phenomenon. Therefore, personality cannot be meaningfully conceptualized, understood, described, and explained outside of a social collective context as opposed to the unique individual context. Fourth, the following from the assumption the Afrocentric approach assumes that the polarity of biogenetic or racial types define different natures of personality, having their own unique set of psychological and behavioral traits. Personality can therefore be characterized and classified on that basis. In other words, as a racial phenomenon. This assumption, of course, proposes the existence of racial personality and racial personality traits. When these four general assumptions are applied to African personality specifically, three fundamental premises evolve. One, that African personality is African, racially, culturally speaking, in its basic nature. Two, that the exposure of African personality to European culture and the white supremacy forces of racial cultural oppression have only substantially affected its conscious expressive dimensions and not its basic African nature as well. So, although you may conform, you code switch. And three, that Africanity, in the sense of, cosmology worldview, dominates the personality patterns of a racially mixed individual of part African descent if its biogenetic presence or African genetic structure is minimally evident in the phenotype physiological characteristics of the person. So if you look black, you're going to act black, you're going to be black, and be more African. This last premise addresses the biogenetic predicament of particularly Africans in the American hemisphere, where the brutal raping of African women and men occurred for over 3 centuries, producing the phenomenon of miscegenation and mulattoization of substantial numbers of the African race. There is a wealth of evidence in the so called biological sciences which confirm the biogenetic dominance of African genetic traits. Hence, this position is well grounded, and some of its specific critical aspects for African personality, such as melanin specifically, will be discussed more substantially in Chapter 3. Based on these critical fundamental assumptions of the Afrocentric approach regarding the nature of African personality, the following positions may be asserted. African personality may be conceptualized as a collective, shared biophysical condition that is fundamental to the nature of African people and therefore only characterizes the African race. Further, African personality is a stable and enduring condition that can be assessed in terms of a distinct cognitive emotional structure and network of critical behavior patterns. The distinct cognitive emotional structure and behavioral patterns under natural conditions can be observed or plausibly inferred in African people generally, regardless of the geopolitical and sociocultural conditions in which they might be found to exist throughout the world. Conclusion. In conclusion, let me reiterate these critical points. The concept of Black equals African personality, as used herein, refers to a collective shared psychological condition that is fundamental to the nature of African people. It refers to a deeply rooted cognitive emotional style and a network or configuration of behaviors that, particularly under natural conditions, conditions where alien influences are absent, and generally under all conditions, can be observed or plausibly inferred in African people wherever they are found to exist on the planet. Technically speaking, when Black equals African personality refers to the system of psychogenetic, spiritual, cognitive, emotional, and biochemical and behavioral traits that are fundamental to African people. It is, in effect, the African cultural collective, psychogenetic reality manifesting itself in the basic psychological or spiritual cognitive emotional dispositions and behaviors of African people. Thus, the phenomenon of African personality comprises a identifiable set of biogenetic, cognitive, emotional, behavioral dimensions. The task before us now, understandably, is to clarify the basic nature of African personality and the contents of its major dimensions. This will be considered in chapter 3. Yay, we got through chapter 2. So, as you can see, we're different. Our genetics make us different. We have been changed epigenetically. That's what Dr. DeGroy talks about when she talks about post traumatic slave syndrome. We have to look at those different things. We have to look at what we have been through in an attempt to see whether or not their paradigm or their worldview fits into our worldview. We have to get to the point where we accept our standards and norms as standards and norms for us. I put the link in the chat if anyone would like to come up and discuss this. I fixed my sync issues. I know I had some sync issues last week. Um, but I really like what he had to say about the fact that the goal of a non-Afrocentric personality is a Eurocentric orientation, a transracial universal orientation, and a pseudo-Afrocentric orientation. And those all sound like different forms of integration, and different forms of integration, no matter where they can be found, lead to the deletion of you. Because first, they seek to settle around you. They just want to do business with you. They just want to trade with you. They just want to share resources, give you a money system. They want to enter into your markets. Then you've been living around each other for a couple of generations, and you figure out, hey, this is the richest guy in town. If I marry my daughter into his family, her children will be well taken care of. But the blood is diluted at that point. So then they begin to socially and sexually integrate their ways into the wealthiest families. They begin to socially and sexually integrate themselves into the power structure, because they'll sacrifice one or two generations, but they know that they're going to marry back white. So they socially and sexually integrate into that family dynamic. And once they're there and that person passes away, they have all these children that are now going to choose the white side, okay? And they're going to take those resources into white culture. If they can pass, then they're going to go live a life as a totally white person. If they can't pass, they're more acceptable to white people because now they have resources and they're not as dark as the average black person. So then once they do that, they have now taken money out of the community, and it now circulates into the dominant society community, the white society. So those are my thoughts. And we have to look at the fact that these people have been doing this for a very long time. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. How are you this evening?
How you doing, matron?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, I'm glad you got it straightened out. The
Yeah, I got it
connection.
straightened out.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's great reading as usual, matron. First of all, I'm celebrating my birthday today. I turned 58 today. Yeah.
Happy birthday. Happy born on day. I'm so happy for you. Thank you for spending
Thank you,
some of that
ma'am.
time with me today.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I was of course, I enjoyed the reading, matron. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Teach us and everything. My question, the question that I guess I wanted to ask you is, how do we, how can I put this? How do we convey to our people, Black people, African people in America, how do we convey to them that we is this the right word? Okay, how do we convey to them that we need to recapture our African personality? I mean, you know what I'm saying? As for our African, the values and everything, the systems that we had in place, for ourselves before, this before the Ma'afa. I mean, how do we convey to our people that we need to reclaim this, living in there, and like you're saying, in the situation, that we live in right now, and how that this would be beneficial for us, as a people. I don't know if I said it right, but what are your thoughts on that?
I really think we need to present the things that they're trying to revere, like the fact that we all have about 16% European DNA and ancestry in us, as an interruption in our bloodline. That was a forced interruption. So when you say that I'm more closely related to these Europeans that surround me, you're actually revering and lionizing and making the hero someone that probably raped your great great grandmother. That's my family story specifically. Specifically, I know that 5 generations ago, my great great grandmother was raped and she began to have children with this man, and her daughter was raped and had children with his son. And then when they became free and they were able to make their own choices, they chose to marry dark-skinned black men and Jamaicans. um, so I present that as an interruption in the bloodline instead of revering this particular 16% European blood I have inside my veins, or 50% European blood I have in my veins. This is our ancestors wanted to reconnect with their African selves. They did not want to marry white people. They didn't want to be with white people, except for those that wanted to pass for economic reasons. But largely, when they had the choice, when I think about Malcolm X's mother, and what she decided to do. She decided to go marry her a big black man, and she was a child of rape. She was a product of rape. So this is an interruption in the bloodline. This is not the bloodline that they actually give you any benefit for having inside of your veins, because you don't get any of the economic benefits, you don't get any of the social benefits, you don't get anything from them. You just have some of their blood interrupting your African blood. Greetings, forecast. How are you tonight?
Hey, what's going on, Matron? Shouts out to Matron. And I hopped on and say happy birthday to my brother right here. Happy birthday, bro.
I know,
Okay,
right?
thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah. And
What do you, what do you think about his question about convincing?
um well, out of respect for Matron Shaw, I'm not gonna say anything negative. But I would say that the children is the only way probably that is going to happen, is to start instilling it into them, and from like before kindergarten, but from kindergarten on. And by the time that they are adults, then when they're able to make decisions, they'll make decisions based more on like their who they are as opposed to what they're trying to fit into. So like Matron said, like, yo, looking at my mom's like side, like I can't find no white people going back to like the 1890s, and that's like, or maybe a little bit further than that, 1870s, as far as I can really go. And then on my dad's side, I think it's like one white girl was in there. Like my granddad, I think his grandma, which was like the 1800s, was like a white chick. I don't know, but I'm not sure. I think so though, but I don't know if it's like rape or something. But I know that that is a product of most of our story, you know. Um, but yeah, that's you know what I say to that.
Mhm. So I heard you watch The Hate U Give. Did you like it?
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. I see what you mean when you were saying like, yeah, because I ain't gonna say it, but like, yo, the girl's boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and you already know I don't like that kind of stuff. But the girl was probably mixed too, right?
She looked mixed, but she is presented in that story as being the byproduct of that man and that woman. So she's supposed to be black.
Right. So yeah, that
But
was
she looked mixed. She looked like she could pass.
yeah,
And when I think about that, I think about the fact that, that is just another reflection of the rape that some ancestor experienced, because that's the only way that a black man and a black woman can come out with a baby that light.
right. And but I also think it's a part of like, you know, them lightening up black women, like calling her black and she's not, you know,
Mhm.
and like how they do that in media and stuff like that. But no, I mean, yeah, the movie, it was itself. I wasn't mad. I watched it. You know what I'm saying? It was good. I would say that. You know, um,
Mhm.
I can't really remember none specifically now that I'm on the spot. I was thinking of something earlier, but I guess I froze up. But
That's okay. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that, they had the Tupac reference in there, and
yeah, Tupac. Yep.
he was, revolutionary for his time, and I can appreciate that. And I can appreciate that her father used to be a gangster and went to prison, and he was somebody that changed his life around. I can appreciate that. He was a business owner, he had created his own economy. And although one of the things I think about is that although his children were being educated in this better school, would any of them want to take over that family business? They didn't really speak to that, but he was preparing them to go out and get good jobs for white people and not necessarily grooming them to take over his business.
No, yeah, that's facts. And then because even them going to that school, like all of the stuff that she was going through when she was at the school, like and you know, them using the protest, and then her white friends, she found out the truth about her white friends. You know what I'm saying? And all of that. And then oh yeah, with the pops, like when he had them on the yard when they got ran up by the police or whatever, and then he had them in the front yard. I like the part with what he was saying to them when he had them lined up on the front yard and was like, you know, stand up and say something. But I mean, and then I guess like, you know, the whole deep down story is kind of messed up. Like two young black children, like from her age group, died before the age of like whatever she was, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then yeah, what you think? Do you think, because this is a debate? Have you ever seen that movie Crash?
I don't remember it.
Okay. So the cop, when he shot the dude, do you think that the young man who got shot by the police was wilding out, or was he not wilding out, or like was he? I know, we know he doesn't deserve to get shot by the cops, but would you be like, yo, you should have been like this, or would you be like, yo, it was nothing he could do? Like,
I really feel like I really feel like they force us into acting and behaving a certain way. I feel like there are norms that they have. He wasn't wilding out. He had a hairbrush. He wasn't, you know, aggressive towards the officer. He wasn't, all up in his face, pushing him or anything like that. I think the officer was scared because they are scared of us. I think that the in that situation, uh, 5 cops out of 6, because even Common, who played her uncle as a cop, said that, he would've reacted the same way towards a black man. They're taught to see black males, especially, and black people in generally, as a threat, and that is just what it is. And until we can change that,
And
we
not the white dude.
yeah, and not the white dude. When white people are more likely to be armed, they're more likely to have drugs, they're more likely to actually be involved in criminality than black people are. But we are just over policed. And we have to get to the point where we're standing up in our communities and we're saying no more policing on this level.
Yeah. But so let me ask you like this, right? All right, the part when she was like, all right, put your hands on the dash and telling him to do that, but he was saying like, yo, no, why you was pulling me over? Now, like in the movie Crash, it's like you seen it before, right? Anthony, Crash.
Yeah, it been a while, man. I seen it one time. I don't remember a lot of it, but I did see it one time. I seen it though. I remember
Right.
seeing it.
So basically, like the cop was like searching Terrence Howard or whatever, and his wife started tripping, and I was see,
I
I'm
remember that
saying,
part.
yeah, but I'm like, this is debate. I had was like, she was older, and it's older people, and it was a woman, but she was saying, well, Terrence Howard did the right thing, but I'm saying like that young brother who you do have the right to defend yourself and to respect yourself, but they're saying like, going back to this movie where that young lady had her hands on the dash, he's saying like that's what you should do and never talk back to the cops. But I'm saying if young dudes continue to do that, we'll always be slaves. It might be putting them in danger though, but it's you'll always be like bowing down to them as long as you act like that. Like you can't be like, oh, just let them search me and all that, and then mad at your wife because you can't do nothing to the cop. You know what I'm saying? Like at some point we got to be like, all right, enough is enough, and stand up. Like what do you think though, Mason? Like you think he should have just put his hands there, or am I tripping?
You're not tripping. If he had put his hands there, he might have lived or survived the encounter. That is something that we teach our children, that you have to survive the encounter and talk about the injustices later. And we are in that position because we have given the police and the state the power to police our lives. We call them for domestic disputes when we should be able to call an elder in our community. They over police us and stop us for things that don't matter, that really don't make sense, just because they think we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if he had survived the encounter, he could have spoke up about the injustice, and he was conscious, and he could have been a prolific leader in the community. So we have to get to the point where, unless there's a crowd around us and we have police, that are we have people that have infiltrated the police department that are going to hold them to account, we have to survive the encounter.
Hey, Matron, I want to follow up behind it what Matron just said. I can remember this was probably it was in the early 90s, man. Probably around about 92 or something like that. I was in a car with some friends. It was 4 of us together. Now you got 4 brothers in a car, and we was riding around. Okay, well, the police had got behind us because, they always come up with a traffic light violation. Well, the police got behind us, came out, and now noted we had a gun in the car too. Okay, so the police came, and they was on my side of the car. They had one guy on my side and a guy on the other side of the driver's car. We was in the front seat. And so he said, do y'all have a gun in the car? Now, I'm like, man, we might as well say, yeah, because, they're going to search the car and find it anyway. Okay, so I said yes, and the brother with me said no. And right then, the police pulled his gun out on my side and had the gun pointed at my head. I mean, he was outside the car, and it was I could feel the heat. And I was just like, this man, actually, no, this man, the wrong move, this man will blow my brains out. You know what I'm saying? It made me think about, what the matron was saying. Now, here we are on the side of the road. It's not a big crowd around. not a lot of people around, it's easy for them to pull off some stuff like that. And so I think that in that situation right there, yeah, man, you live another day, man. You know what I'm saying? I think in that situation with the young man, you talk about, yeah, bro, you go home and live today, man. You know what I'm saying? And think about what we could do next, not to put yourself in that situation again. You know what I'm saying? And next time, if it's a situation, you'll know better. You know what better to do, So I just think, yeah, man, I think I want you to make it home, man, because I don't want us to die over some bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Because I almost did. You know what I'm saying? I mean, because like the major said, no, they fear us. Now here you go, 4 brothers in a car. We all some big size dudes. I mean, they like my size. And and there's 2 white boys standing there, like, man, these dudes here, we let them out the car, ain't no telling what happened. They might get the ups on us. You know what I'm saying? So the man almost, I mean, I could feel it coming from him, like, man, I'm gonna blow his head off. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in real quick, man.
No, yeah, I feel you. I feel you. I mean, y'all make good points, and like, my only thing is, right. And the crazy part is, like, the time I felt like that with the cops, it'd be like, it was a black dude, actually, you know what I'm saying? All the white cops pulled up and the black dude ran up with the gun pointed up, like, y'all, you know what I'm saying? We was like teenagers or like kids, you know what I'm saying? Like, but the thing is, right, like my thing, because I remember one day I got stopped. It was like late night. I was just going to the store for like some ice cream for somebody. And they was like, oh, let me search your car. And I smell this. I don't have nothing at this time. Like I said, I'm just going to the store real quick. And but that's what pisses me off, right? Because I'm like, no, I'm not gonna let you search my car. I was out there for like an hour, and they like they had backup, like 4, like it was like 4 or 5 of them came, and then they like, yo, we gonna call the dogs or whatever. Like after an hour, it was like after midnight and everything. So I'm like, yo, go ahead. And they didn't find nothing, of course, you know what I'm saying? But the problem is, after they do that, it's never any consequences. Like, I know we like, well, later on, we'll get them, like, just come home, and then and I get it, especially if you have children, you know what I'm saying? So I guess I'm not speaking from that point, or loved ones and stuff like that, I have loved ones, but at the same time, I'm like, yo, at some point, like, yo, it's never going to stop if you don't stand up for yourself, you know what I'm saying? And like the debate we was having about the movie, I was like, Terrence Howard was being a coward and telling this woman to shut up and all of this stuff, to not agitate the police, when she was like saying, hey, we have rights, you shouldn't just search me. And I'm like, yo, black men, because this is what it turned into, is like cowards and will not stand up for yourself, you know what I'm saying? And it's just my point. Like, my point is, like, it never gets to the point of there was consequences for the cop later on, though. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, it's like you said, you're risking your life. So I mean, I don't know.
Okay, 4Ks. This real quick, Mitch. Let me say real quick. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, that one incident like that, you need to make it home. What I'm saying on the other part, you're saying how we stop it is that we have to organize. You got to have a plan. You know what I'm saying? You got to have a plan. You make it home from that one, but when you make it home, you know what? We all need to get together and say, "Hey, man, we gotta cut this stuff. We gotta put an end to all this." And you have to do some organizing. You ain't gonna do it by yourself. You know what I'm saying? You need to get the brothers together, like-minded brothers together. Y'all need to organize, and then y'all know we ain't gonna talk about that other stuff. But you know what I'm saying? You need to organize first. You need to have an organization. You need to have some brothers doing some stuff. Man, one man by himself is not going to do it. You could die by yourself and you could die a hero. But I'm saying, but you want to do something that's going to last, that's going to help the larger community, our people as a whole. Something that's going to last past you, past this dying. Mike Brown got killed, in the same situation, ain't nothing really happened, but you know what? People have moved on. But you know what I'm saying? Because they didn't have no organization to combat that. We don't have organizations to combat that kind of mess. But what I'm saying, we as black men and the black community, we got to get ourselves together and organize and put it in, because we could put an end to it. But that's what
Yeah, he's right. We can put an end to it if we're organized. We can put an end to it if we come together, even collecting the data on how many stops they make because that's free and available to you. You can get the data in your city about how many stops the police make and what the race and ethnicity is, because on that ticket, they put a race and ethnicity on the ticket. And no, if they don't give you a ticket, they don't put the race and ethnicity of a stop or anything like that, but they put the race and ethnicity of every ticket that they write. Now, I will tell you what the police in Sterling Heights did. I am an African American woman. I look like an African American woman with a big nose, full lips, and I'm full figured. And they put other as my race or ethnicity in order to get around reporting that they are disproportionately stopping Black people in that community. So you have to look at the other category and you have to look at the Black African American category when you're pulling that data. But you have the right to pull that data and to make a point if you whether you publish an article, whether you make a flyer and say they are stopping this many Black people and this many other people. If you've been stopped by the police, get a Google phone number and have them reach out to you. But there is a way to begin the steps of building organization in your community so that you can stop the unnecessary police stops that they are doing on people that are disproportionately Black and or brown. That's when Black and brown matters. And I know that for a fact because they classified me as other, and I'm 100% African American.
Damn, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. But no, yeah, I feel what y'all saying. Y'all make a good point. And one other thing, speaking of organization, before I get off of here, did y'all hear about like it's some kind of boycott or like major businesses like sometime this week? Y'all hear about that? And is y'all gonna be in it?
Well, I personally don't shop enough outside of my community to make a huge difference. But yeah, there's this blackout on the 28th. They don't want you to spend any money nationwide. And it actually crosses cultural and racial lines. They don't want anybody to spend any money on the 28th. And then they are boycotting different stores going forward to excuse me, in order to boycott the DEI programs that they're dismantling in places like Target. Um, I don't really shop at Target, so it doesn't necessarily impact me on that level. But I made a decision a long time ago to better direct my dollars. And I'm now in the process of interviewing the Black businesses that I do business with to see where their consciousness level is, because you can direct your dollars to a Black proprietor, but that doesn't mean that they are pro Black and that they are actually in the business of helping Black people. But yes, I
Like they got a white wife.
they got a white wife and they got a white consciousness, because that cop that stopped you, that was the Black cop, he was effectively a white person. He was effectively a white person in Black skin. There are a lot of those out there, and we have to get to the point where we're able to better identify those. You know, there are a lot of authors that have talked about there are certain jobs that if a Black person has that job, they're effectively a white person, and they're trying to integrate into white society, and police is one of them.
Yeah, that's facts. That's facts. Yeah, what about you, Anthony? You gonna do it?
I do the matron, and I'm like the matron. I pretty much don't really go outside my community that much as far as shopping, local, things like that. I mean, if I just definitely have to go somewhere to, something like something go wrong in the house, you need something for plumbing or something like that. But I mean, I pretty much, shop here, man. Stay in my community as far as, spending my money. You know, yeah, I'm like the matron, man.
Yeah. Now I feel you. I'm with y'all. And to be honest with you, I should go spend my money with them that day, just cause Black people gonna fight for everything but for them themselves. Gonna put some damn DEI. And if this what it took, I probably, I'm gonna stop. Yo, I appreciate you letting
You
me
don't
go.
have to stop. No, you don't have to stop, and don't censor yourself, because I said through our word and talked about the fact that most of us come from rape anyway. My podcasts are not for monetization. Any extras I get are donations from generous people like you and Sister Raw and Justin Lieberg and Bwana Hagaziki and Anthony McPhail. That's where I get my kudos. So say what you need to say. This is a safe space. This is a space where we say what it is. Because if we
Well,
don't say what it is, then we just gonna hold it in with all of these illusory, illusions of what it is instead of saying what it actually is. So say it.
well, no, it wasn't a cuss word or not. It would have made it would have made all of them probably mad. But you know what? You're right. I would have voted for Trump earlier if it was gonna make black people get on code and boycott and start doing black business weeks and all this stuff. We only been saying it for what? He probably been saying it for 40, 50 years. You probably been out. I ain't gonna say how long. I've been saying it for at least 7, 8 years. You know what I'm saying? Like I would have voted for him sooner. So that's what I was gonna say.
There's nothing wrong
Hey,
with
hey,
that.
matron and forecast. I want to ask a question, no related to that. I'm saying, how long do we think that black people that we gonna stick together as far as our money now? I mean, will it endure past Trump's administration? But will we then go back to business as usual? Like say, if another administration is elected, you know what I'm saying? Or more, I guess a liberal man, You know what I'm saying? Somebody who they would deem better than Trump. Will we say, well, let's stop sticking together with our money? Let's go back to doing what we used to do.
It might not last. It might not last past next week. Trump probably still be in there when we go back to the store. And I'm not saying that to hate, because you know what? I'll take all of that back. We this is the opportunity that we need to take advance, and then we are working towards making some, getting schools and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully the next generation will be smarter because we needed the wake up call, you know what I'm saying? And maybe at one point we'll be like, okay, we need to fight like this for ourselves instead of fighting to be a part of everybody else. But it's an inferiority complex that we got to work out, you know what I'm saying? So I'll say that.
I really feel like we are going to go back to business as usual as soon as it becomes more than a little inconvenient. Um, they are going to raise gas prices. So then it's like we're not going to decide to augment our strategy and go on buses together to go shopping. We're not going to augment our strategies to say, okay, everybody don't have to buy a membership to the local food co-op and buy toilet paper, but one person can buy the membership to the co-op and then divide the toilet paper. We're not going we have to get to the point where we're augmenting our strategies and changing it up and changing the way that we do things as quickly as they do so that we are able to respond when they change their tactics up because they will hire black people to be the cashier when it's really a white owned business. They will put us in a place in a position where we think we're supporting a black business and it's Arab or Asian and they ain't our friend. They're not our friends either. We have no friends. We don't have any allies when it comes to this thing, you know? So I think that it'll last for as long as it's reasonably convenient. And we have to figure out ways now to make it more convenient for us to do business with black people.
Yeah, facts. I agree with 100% with that, And I appreciate you letting me speak, Matron. Happy birthday again to my brother. You know what I'm saying? You about to be an elder over there. So shout out to my
Yeah,
brother
appreciate
right
it.
here. A salute to you, my brother. I hope you enjoy your day and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for letting me speak, Matron. This was another great live, great reason. I appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Forecast. I appreciate you for coming up, and I value the fact that you take time each and every Monday to come and listen to what it is I have to say. We have to get to the point where we're studying these European people. We have to get to the point where we know them as well as they know us because they've been studying us before we knew and recognized ourselves as an us. And one of the things they do, and one of the things that we have to know is that they are anti African. White is an inclusionary status to the exclusion of the African because they'll call everybody that wasn't white, all these other groups that say, oh, the gypsies weren't white, oh, the Sicilians and the Italians weren't white, oh, the Scottish and the Irish weren't white. But they got over here, they played the game, and they became white. They tell Arabs and Asians they weren't white, but now they're white because they're here. And it's to the exclusion of Black because they are inherently anti African. And when we get to the point where we understand that they are anti us, maybe we can be a little more pro us and we can be anti them. Anthony McPhail, thank you so much for coming up. Did you have any last words you wanted to say on your special day?
Oh no, ma'am. I just like hey, I agree with you 100%. And well, one little thing I was just thinking about a few minutes ago, Major, when you said how they were going to raise the gas prices. I said I think about the Montgomery bus boycott, like when they wouldn't let Black people, sit on the bus where they wanted to sit, and then when they had a boycott. I thought about this: if we was politically educated, that politically savvy, we could say, okay, y'all gonna raise the gas prices. We do, like you say, we're gonna start riding the bus. Or even other than that, guess what? We've been in bad shape physically, a lot of us. We're gonna get some bicycles and ride to work on our bicycles. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna ride our bicycles and we gonna make you lower them gas prices. And at the same time, we're gonna do something to get ourselves in better shape and better health. What you think about that, Badger?
I think that's an excellent idea. Like I said, we have to get to the point where we're changing our strategies and where we are prepared for when the shift happens. Because right now, gas used to be 309 in my neighborhood. They have lowered gas prices to 269 in my neighborhood, which I find interesting as we prepare to build up into this boycott. So okay, it seems like things are working in our favor and going along to get along. But I know that with Trump in office and the things that he's doing and the different things that are going on, gas prices are about to spike. And we need to be ready for that. I got my bicycle ready. I got my walking shoes ready. I'm going to get a bus pass when the time comes. But we have to get to the point where we are ready. Where we are ready. Yeah. So, forecast, you going live on Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm gonna be back this Wednesday. I'm trying to get back to normal. I'm gonna be back.
Wonderful. So, forecast will be live this Wednesday at 9 p.m. Anthony McPhail is our always wonderful, constant guest on everybody's broadcast. We appreciate and value him so much. Sister Raw, thank you for being in the chat. And Anthony McPhail for being here. Thank you, Forecast, for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I will see you guys next Monday at 7 p.m.
Peace out, everybody. Y'all peace.
Peace, guys.